I think we're streaming. Yes, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, everyone. So we're streaming. The crux of today, ladies and gentlemen, the United States of America will take over Britain. When I started talking about this, it seemed far-fetched, it seemed wild. Today, there's more flesh on these bones. Donald Trump made Donald Trump made a speech today, and he was laying the groundwork for a US takeover of the United Kingdom. Now, I know that sounds wild, but it sounds less wild today than it did a year ago when I said it. And this time next year, people are going to be screaming out for it. People will be saying, oh, please, the United States, come and take over. So that's what we're going to be focusing on today. Also, I've got I had a personal message. I had an inbox message from a young lady. I'm not going to mention her name. She's really worried. So what I'm going to do is, after I've given my opening monologue, I'm going to talk in respect to what this lady is worried about. She's, as I understand it, she's a single mum. She's got a 12-year-old son, and she's really worried about what's going to happen in the United Kingdom if we fall into all-out war. So I am going to be covering that as well. But first of all, ladies and gentlemen, I guess we're on now. Can you do me a real big favor before we start? Hit the buttons down below, the buttons up there, the like, comment, subscribe, all those things that help this channel grow. So whether you're watching on YouTube, whether you're watching on TikTok, or whether you're watching on X. And listen, pretty soon, I think we're going to be streaming on another platform as well. I don't know which one it's going to be yet. We've not decided. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, we have seen today in the mainstream media Donald Trump's, in fact, let me turn that down, Donald Trump's most recent speech about immigration. I'm going to play that for you guys now. I'm going to stop this at various points, and we're going to discuss this. Now, what I want everyone to do, ladies and gentlemen, while you're listening to this speech, just imagine, just put your tinfoil hats on, all right? And just pretend, just think to yourself, right, if the United States were planning to come into the United Kingdom and take over the United Kingdom, how would this speech fit into place? How would this speech make any more sense? Would this speech give new meaning and new nuances? So we are going to play this speech now, guys. I will be stopping it at various points, so it won't be going on. It's 2 minutes long, but I will stop it at various points. So just when we're listening to this, ladies and gentlemen, just think when you're listening to this speech, just think, okay, the United States is going to take over, and then the speech makes a lot more sense.
To say, I look at London where you have a terrible mayor. It's been so changed. Now they want to go to Sharia law, but you're in a different country. You can't do that. Both the immigration and the suicidal energy ideas will be the death of Western Europe if something is not done immediately. This cannot be sustained.
So what Donald Trump is saying there is, look at London with a terrible mayor. You know, he's a terrible mayor. He's saying how much London has changed. Now, conceptualize this, that, you know, that what's happening, it's going to get worse. Believe me, guys, it's going to get worse before it gets better. You know, and what he's saying there is, you know, now we've got Sharia law courts operating in the United Kingdom. That's what Donald Trump's saying, not me.
What makes the world so beautiful is that each country is unique.
So just quickly there, that's what I should have stopped it. What Donald Trump says there is, what makes the world so beautiful is each country is unique. And that is diversity. And I'm all for diversity, guys. I'm for diversity. Like, I like going to the Middle East and being among Middle Eastern culture. I like going to Africa and being among African culture. When you mix it, it's like, you know, when you get a palette of colors, you know, plasticine, for example, you know, when you get a palette of colors and they're all beautiful colors, you get like red, orange, green, blue, you know, purple, you know, you get all the colors and they're all beautiful colors. And you're like, oh, I want that color to do this. Oh, I want that color to do this. What happens if you get all those plasticine and you just mix them together? You don't really get anything. You get something, you get like a brownie color. And I'm not saying brown people are, I'm not saying anything. I'm saying that's what happens. You get like a dark brownie color and you can't use that for anything, you know. So what Donald Trump is saying there is diversity is beautiful, and it is. But when you're forcing these mixtures, you don't have any diversity. So these people that are calling for diversity, what they're actually calling for is an end to diversity.
But to stay this way, every sovereign nation must have the right to control their own borders. You have the right to control your borders, as we do now, and to limit the sheer numbers of migrants entering their countries and paid for by the people of that nation that were there and that built that particular nation at the time. They put their blood, sweat, tears, money into that country.
So what he's saying there is, you know, people put their blood, sweat, tears, money into the country that they live in to make it what it is. And what Donald Trump is saying, that people shouldn't just be allowed to come over and, you know, have whatever they want off that country.
And now they're being ruined. Proud nations must be allowed to protect their communities and prevent their societies from being overwhelmed by people they have never seen before, with different customs, religions, with different everything. The migrants have violated laws, lodged false asylum claims.
I don't know, ladies and gentlemen. Listen, I don't know. Do we think here in the United Kingdom we have do we think in the United Kingdom we have a problem with crime? You know, do we think that criminal aspect's a thing in the United Kingdom?
Are claimed refugee status for illegitimate reasons. They should, in many cases, be immediately sent home. And while we will always have a big heart for places and people that are struggling and truly compassionate, answers will be given. We have to solve the problem, and we have to solve it in their countries, not create new problems in our countries. And we are very helpful to a lot of countries.
So what he's saying there is, rather than create problems in our countries, we need to go and solve the problems in their countries. So rather than, I don't know, whatever country you think has a problem, rather than import those problems here, what he's saying is we should go to their countries and solve those problems. There's a word for that. It sounds like colonization.
That are just not able to send their people anymore. They used to send them to us in caravans of 25,000, 30,000 people each. These massive caravans of people pouring into our country, totally unchecked and unvetted. But not anymore. According to the Council of Europe in 2024, almost 50% of inmates in German prisons were foreign nationals.
So 50% of people in German prisons are foreigners. 50%.
Of migrants. In Austria, the number is 53% of the people in prisons were from places that weren't from where they are now. In Greece, the number. So what we can take from that, guys, is, you know, I believe right now, slowly but surely, there are footsteps leading towards a US takeover of the United Kingdom. Now, if you look at these big global events, these big global, these big shifting things that happen, you know, the reality is that I believe that is all moving to that direction, whereby we are going to be in a situation where people are screaming out for a US takeover. And I do think that will come. Now, whether that is going to be US military coming over with with aircraft carriers and fighter jets and long range strikes on Sharia law courts in Bradford, I would say I don't know how likely that is. Or it could be Nigel Farage
starts talking about this after the next election, people have a vote on it, they have a referendum, and look, guys, and that's how it could happen. It could be nothing as spicy as, you know, US military on the ground. It could just be, right, we're going to vote for this, and, you know, we're going to vote for it, and we are going to vote either to be part of the United States or not to be part of the United States. And let's face it, ladies and gentlemen, out of everybody who's in politics at the moment, Nigel Farage has got the best experience of forcing referendums on government. So that's the direction of travel that we're in at the moment. Just real quickly, guys, who's trolling on YouTube? I can't see anyone trolling on my YouTube. Right, this is right, ladies and gentlemen, you guys that are on YouTube, the YouTube chat does get wild. It really does. I do need to sort something out on this YouTube chat. I don't want to move it to like subscribers only or something. Templar Matt, who are we talking about? Name and shame them, Templar Matt. Templar Matt, can you name and shame them, please? I think everything's okay at the moment. Right, ladies and gentlemen, I need suggestions for how I deal with the chat. I need suggestions on how I deal with the chat on YouTube. It's getting wild. It really is. I don't want to block people, and I don't think I should block people. But equally, like, you know, we're having like massive essays written, and it's just like, and you're just looking at it, you're thinking, right, it's not offensive. I don't know where I go, guys. I don't know where I go with that. Anyway, let me get some comments. Snowdrops is saying you need mods, Sean. You need moderators. We need right. All right. Okay. So we've got none. So we don't have anybody yet on YouTube. Right. I'll keep ahead. Ladies and gentlemen, I can deal with everything myself. I mean, what do we do, guys? Do we? I don't want to block people. I only want to block people, you know, and I don't want to block people because I want people to, I don't think it's fair blocking people, but equally, you know, I think people need to be fair as well and not put these long essays on and not, you know, do whatever. So I do think we need to think about it. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, that's what we're talking about tonight. Hang on. That's what we're talking about this evening. The United States takeover of the United Kingdom. I do believe this is happening, guys. You know, I've been saying this for a long time. When I first said this last year, it sounded so wild. You know, it sounded so absolutely wild. But right now, it's not. It doesn't. You're too quiet. Candy Rocks is saying you're too quiet. Oh, right, okay, yeah. I will. If Jeremiah comes back on, YouTube, I'll warn him. And if it's a him, I think it's a him. I will warn Jeremiah, and then if he keeps putting those long messages on talking about kings and stuff, I'll just put him in the I'll just mute him for the rest of the live stream. Right, guys, just real quick, Googly had a question. So Googly was on the chat and he was saying Donald Trump, and I've not seen this and I've got no reason to doubt what Googly was saying, but Googly was saying that Donald Trump has said that he thinks NATO should have the right to shoot down these Russian jets. Well, it's all going to the circumstances around that is all, you know, that's what's going to matter. Also, we've all heard that Donald Trump, he's going to have a peace deal in Ukraine, that it's going to, you know, it's going to happen 24 hours before he's won the election, after he's won the election. You know, he's not even going to wait to be inaugurated. It's not happening, guys. You know, it's not happening. I don't think the US overtly are going to support this. Of course, what they will want to sell as many weapons as they can because they're making money. But as soon as they start to need those weapons themselves, because remember, these factories, these military-industrial complex factories, they can only produce so much. So they're not going to let other people have that stuff if they need it themselves. So while they can provide that excess, that excess, what's the word I'm looking for? Capacity, they will, because they're making money from it, and that money's not coming from US taxpayers, so that's a good thing. But as soon as they need that stuff themselves, they will close the doors on those European exports. Mark my words. Snowdrops is saying, hang on. Snowdrops is saying, I think, oh no, Googly, sorry, is saying, I think Russia will make excuses for going in territories. After a while, Trump will know what's up. I think Trump knows, Donald Trump knows anyway. What we've got to understand is it was already written into US law back in 2023 that the US in fact, what did they say? They said that basically the US are saying they're going to, how was it worded? It was worded in November 2023. They said it was written into US law that the United States would take all action necessary to stop Iran gaining a nuclear weapon. That's what they said. They wrote that into US law. So that dictates everything else that's going to happen in the Middle East. The chat, right, guys, the chat. I've had another update on TikTok, and the chat's really difficult to use. Have you seen the clip of Macron got stuck behind Donald Trump's motorcade? Yeah, so there's this clip of Emmanuel Macron, and he's stuck on the road because the police have cordoned the road off, and he says, "Oh, you can't go any further because Donald Trump's coming down." So he phones Donald Trump up, and he's like, Donald, you can't. No, that's German. I can't do the French accent, but yeah, I mean, it is what it is. Donald Trump's Donald Trump. He's the leader of the free world. James is saying, "Have you heard Uncle?" Yeah, I mean, so there right now there's drone warfare going on, guys. There is absolute drone warfare going on in Eastern Europe. The Ukrainians are striking the Russians are striking the Ukrainians. There's drones flying all over the place. So yeah, these things are happening all the time. Right, listen, also, if anyone lives in and around Hull, I got a message earlier on today. I can't find anything on the mainstream. Let me just Google this real quick again. No, I can't find it. There's nothing on the mainstream media about this, no. So I got a message today saying that a school in Hull was put on. Oh, Leslie. So I'm asking this question to you, Leslie. So I got a message today saying that a school had been put on lockdown in Hull because there was a man outside with one of the sharp pointy things. So I don't know what that's. I'm not saying it's not true, but I'm just suspicious why nothing came on the why there's nothing on the mainstream media about that. Sorry, guys. There's so many questions. There's so much on the chat this evening. Sorry, guys. I'm just okay. Here we are. No, I've done that one. So Sean McKay is saying it would be great for the US to take over the United Kingdom. There's too many not united here. From now on YouTube, he's saying a 17-year-old boy. Oh, hang on. Right, so from now he's saying a 17-year-old boy was suspected of possessing an offensive something, and his home was searched following the incident at Royal Leamington Spa. See, I still don't know whether this thing happened. I'm still trying to get news about what happened in Hull today. So for those of you who were just joining, there was an incident allegedly today in Hull where a man was arrested with one of the sharp pointy things. Now, he was outside a school. The school was placed on lockdown, and the person that actually messaged me, he said it was his niece. So I've got no reason. I've got no reason to doubt him. Right now, as promised, I got a message earlier on. I got a message earlier on from a young lady. Now, let me just go and let me find this message. Now, I got a message from a young lady earlier on, and she was, she's watching all this stuff that's happening on the news. She's watching, the slow march towards global conflict on an industrial scale, and she's really worried. I think I'm just gonna repeat a few things that I've said previously on previous videos. Yes, stuff is gonna be cheaper. Stuff is cheaper now than it will be next year. That's an inevitability. Whatever you're paying, however expensive you think things are now, next year it's going to be more expensive. That's the reality, guys, with inflation. If the United Kingdom falls into a global conflict, it's only going to affect a very small amount of people. It is, and those people are going to be predominantly military. Those people are going to be predominantly fighting age men. And those people will probably work in, and the other people will be those people who work in the military industrial complex. So if none of that sounds like you're probably going to be okay. People are worried about food shortages. Look, guys, I think nobody's going to run out of food in the United Kingdom. Although I do see that food shortages are on the cards. Oh, but Sean, how can we have food shortages and nobody run out of food? Okay, right, two different things, all right? So a food shortage would be, right, everyone, we can't get cucumbers. There's no cucumbers in the United Kingdom. We're all cucumbered out. That is the food shortage. Nobody's gonna starve to death because they don't have a cucumber. I don't know. Maybe there's someone somewhere that all they can eat is cucumbers. So that's what I'm talking about. You might not be able to get your favorite mangoes or Australian kiwis or whatever. But I don't think anyone in the United Kingdom is going to run out of food. There's always going to be your food groups there, pasta, potatoes, pork, lamb, beef, chicken. We're not going to run out of chickens, guys. So I do think all those things are there. And people are, oh, should I have this much food in, I'll have this much stored away. And it can consume your life. Guys, it can absolutely consume your life unbelievably. Hang on a minute. I've got a message on the group chat. Give me a second. Sorry. I would just say to people, make sure you've got 3 days food and water in your cupboards. If you want to go more than that, fine. But people need to be realistic and think, right, how much food and water are we really going to need here? I don't think people in the UK are going to be starving. We're a rich country. we are a rich European country. We can destroy our own economy. That's fine, and then we just pay for inflation. That's what would happen. And remember, all these things would be. Wouldn't it be? Can you imagine? Can you imagine? Here's the thing, guys, and I'm just thinking about this in real time. Can you imagine this? Tell me how likely you think this is. Global conflict on an industrial scale. We can't get any food in. We've got to do rationing. But to receive your rations, you need to download this digital ID, and then you get your rations. Does that sound like it could happen? I don't know. I think it's likely. So I wouldn't worry unless you're in one of those industries. And even if you are in one of those industries, I don't see the massive. Right now, I don't see, and I've always said this, I don't see anything coming over from anywhere and going kaboom. Let's see what happens with Poland. If Poland starts to take strikes, they start to be in a kinetic exchange with Russia or Belarus, then we would reevaluate that situation. But until then, guys, I really wouldn't worry about it. As far as getting food and water stored, how much do you want to get stored? We're not going to be in, we're not going to be in nuclear Armageddon. I can guarantee that. At the very most, I think we might have to go without power for a couple of days. We might have to go without food for a couple of days. But to some people, that's a big thing. It really is. I remember in 2010, I think, it was 2010, there was a massive thunderstorm. There was a massive snowstorm in the United Kingdom. And, excuse me, I think it was Tesco. There was a few supermarkets, and they came out and they said, look, the snow is actually that bad. We can't do any resupply runs to the supermarkets. So where we live in Northern England, there was nothing. And I remember going into Tesco's, and it was wild. It was really there were apocalyptic scenes. There were two old ladies fighting over the last loaf of, well, it wasn't the last loaf of bread, actually. One old lady had gone in and she took all the bread, and another old lady had gone in and she'd said, I want some bread. And the other lady had said, not my problem, I'm gone. And, I think I think that sort of mindset is that mindset is what I would be more conscious about. I wouldn't be conscious about bombs and stuff coming over. I'd be worried about other people, next door neighbors, people down the street who have no idea what's coming. But, they're the ones going out drinking every weekend. They're the ones having barbecues and parties in the garden. There's always beer cans getting poured into the bin. They're the people who in my experience, they are the people that will turn nasty and will come knocking on your door, and they will want some of the stuff you've got stored. Why? Because they can. So I'd be more worried about that than Russian bombs coming over, because I think that's highly unlikely. So Chair over on YouTube has just said, a man was caught hiding in bushes, getting one of his, taking his reproductive organ out to girls in Outwood. Was on Yap app. I don't know what Yap app is. And news. I've seen this quite a few times now, where men, who I can only say are African migrants, want to expose themselves. And why would you do that? Do people have no common decency left? Amanda is saying, can I ask, with the risk of power outages, what happens if, like, my son uses medical equipment? It depends what medical equipment that is. Obviously, I wouldn't be able to speculate tell whatever your medical equipment is, Amanda. If you've got that medical equipment in the house, do you have a backup power supply? Like, is it on a battery? What we've seen recently in the United Kingdom is these substations. Obviously, I can't say they've been sabotaged. I can't say that at all, because there's nothing out on the mainstream media saying that these electricity substations have been sabotaged. So if I said that, that would be fake news. It would be misinformation. What I can say is a lot of substations have been set on fire. But you know what? Not even that. I can't even say that. Let me go back. So that's fake news. What I just said was fake news, ladies and gentlemen. It was a slip of the tongue. What I can say is a lot of electricity substations have been burning down for unknown reasons. That, that's all I can, that's all I can say on that. So I would say, do you have a battery pack on that? It is going to depend what type of medical equipment, but if you've got a battery pack that can operate that, and for how long, I would try and work on, like, the other day we had, like, our electricity just went. I don't know what happened. The electricity just went. And it was a Sunday, and they couldn't get. I think it was like Sunday at. It was a Sunday in the summer holidays, and I don't know. I think it was like 6 o'clock or something, and they couldn't get an engineer to us until 9 o'clock the next day. That was a faff, guys. That was an absolute faff. No electricity for, like, what was it, like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Call it, I don't know. Call it 18 hours or something. It was difficult. We didn't have any electricity. The oven didn't work. Just nothing. Absolutely nothing worked. So I would try and aim, and you know what, guys, I take that as a blessing. I do. I take that as a blessing, because now we've got even more battery packs in the house. We've got even more. We're even more ready for that power outage. And unless you have these things happen to you yourself, you kind of just, like, pay lip service to them. Like, I always harp on about water. I do. I always harp on about water. I was stuck in a place in northeast Syria, and I was stuck there for. I was only stuck there for a day. I had 24 hours, maybe a bit over. I had 2 liters of water, and it's psychological, guys. With the water, can you imagine if our water supply in the United Kingdom gets contaminated, or somebody pours ricin into it, or somebody sabotages some pipe somewhere? Can you imagine how you would cope if you went to that tap and you turned it? Nothing happened. Didn't turn on. Can you imagine how you would cope? Nothing to drink. Think what the supermarkets would be like. If you can imagine the apocalyptic scenes when 2 old ladies are fighting over loaves of bread, when nobody's run out. Tesco's just said, yeah, we're not going to be able to get any deliveries out until this snowstorm's finished. And it was absolute apocalypse scenes. You can imagine how things would be if there was no water. If the water companies came out and said, yeah, the water's gone off, we don't know when we're going to get it turned back on. I would say it would be difficult. When you go to, like, the supermarket to buy water, I can guarantee you somebody will have gone into that supermarket, and I can probably tell you what they'd look like, but I'm not gonna, because I want to be I don't want to try and throw slurs anymore. But can you imagine going into the supermarket, right? There's no water. And then you go outside and there's somebody with his boot open selling the bottles of water from the supermarket at 10x price. Because that's what will happen, guys. I can guarantee you that's what will happen. Like, what do you think will happen in that scenario? Do you think violence will break out? I'd say it would. I'd say it would in that scenario. Can you imagine? And if you've got kids, imagine your kids saying, "Mummy, Daddy, I'm thirsty. Can I have a glass of water?" And you can't turn the water on. Honestly, guys, the psychological problems that it will give you are absolutely huge. Right, let me just have a quick look on YouTube, make sure everybody's behaving. Is everyone behaving on YouTube? It looks like everyone's behaving on YouTube. Alex Core is saying he's gonna. I think Alex Core is saying he's gonna stockpile bacon. And then Alex Core's also saying we could have a right-wing TV show like The Running Man. I think we're heading towards the Hunger Games. Temple saying we're all good so far. Right, okay, we are good so far on the we're good so far. Freddie on YouTube is saying Russia's forces exert pressure all along the front line, including around the crucial city of Pokrovsk. Ukraine is struggling to hold the front. Yeah, they are, guys. The Ukrainians are struggling to hold the front. I think the Russians are not pushing forwards, not because the Ukrainians are holding them back, but because the Russians don't want to overexert themselves. That's what I think is happening in that scenario, you know. If you guys look back to, hang on a minute. Alex Core on YouTube, I'll come on to your comment in a minute, buddy. I don't think the Russians... Right, let me get this comment in a minute. In fact, you know what? Let me get Alex Core's comment here. So if you guys can remember back in 2022, with the 2022 invasion of Ukraine, the second invasion of Ukraine, I guess, the Russians really overextended themselves, and you can't overextend yourself. The Russian fighting forces were operating far too far ahead of their logistics. They got cut off. They were they got easily picked off. That's why I don't think the Russians are pushing as hard as they could right now. Alex Core is saying Russia. In fact, you know what? I can't say. I just remember. Right, I can't say what Alex Core is saying because it would get me banned on TikTok. I can't, guys. I just Alex Core, you almost got me banned then. I know it wasn't your fault, but you know. So if you guys are looking on YouTube, what Alex Core is saying, I don't, and I can say this, I don't think that's true because the Russian military is set up differently. You know, they're set up differently. Now, if you class your military strength by how much your drones cost and how much you pay your engineers to lay those composites for the wings and how much specialized milling and machinery goes into those engines, yeah, of course, you know, the Western military is the best. If you class your military on how much ground they can take and hold, then that metric isn't so. Then that metric starts to become very, very, very different. Alex Core is saying Ukraine destroyed the Red Army with drones. They haven't. They haven't, guys. It's a myth. It's an absolute myth. It's a myth, and it's a media. It's fake news. These drones, you know how we're seeing like images on YouTube and on X all the time of these cheap little UAVs, and they're going in and they're destroying stuff. Yes, that is happening, but it's happening on an absolutely tiny scale. It's not been significant enough to stop that military advance. At best, what it's doing is it's taking the place of artillery. You know, so where you would use 5-10 artillery rounds to get a job done, you're using 4 or 5 of these little quadcopters, and because they're more surgical, yes, they can get a better, they can get a better surgical strike. But there's a lot of that doesn't happen every time. You know, people are saying, oh, they've got these fiber optic cables now and they can't be jammed. I agree, they do have fiber optic cables and they can't be jammed. Those fiber optic cables get snagged, they don't work, the connections become loose. There's a lot of problems with those fiber optic cables, guys. A lot of problems, you know. And we see, well, you guys see, anyway, I'm privy to I've got a lot of Ukrainian friends, so I am privy to a lot, well, not a lot, but quite, well, yeah, you know, I'm going to say a lot of inside information. And these, you know, these drones, they're not what people, they're not as effective as people think. JT, right, guys, does anybody live in Chesterfield? Does anyone live in Chesterfield? As I understand it, there is a, you know, there's an, as I understand it, there is a protest at a hotel in Chesterfield on Saturday. If anyone knows anything about that, Tim Linsky over on YouTube is saying, Sean, I was with Sean, hang on. So if you guys remember, I said that the Russians would stop at the Dnipro. Turns out they've gone straight over the river Dnipro, and Tim Linsky is just saying the same thing here. You know, he's saying we all thought that the Russians would move up to the river Dnipro and they would take the river Dnipro, and that is a perfect line. It's a perfect line to form a skirmish behind, and you can say, right, this is our side and that's your side. It's perfect. Turns out, you know, the Russians have gone straight over, and the Russians are now in central Ukraine. They're laying claim to central Ukrainian towns, and that's the reality. So when we said the Russians only wanted up to Ukraine, it looks like now the situation could be, no, they're just pushing further and further across. Right. So Armchair and Bushcraft is saying, we spoke about this earlier. So Armchair and Bushcraft, I spoke about this earlier. Do you have any, is this out on any local media? Is anyone reporting on this? Because I can't find anything on, I can find nothing on media at the moment, on any mainstream media. And if I say what Armchair Bushcraft is saying, I will get my video taken down for fake news. So if it's out there if there's any obscure news outlet reporting on that, could you please let me know, and I'll talk about it. Armchair is saying, no, it's not on the news. Right. Okay. And I'm not doubting you. It's just, I can't say that what Armchair and Bushcrafter is saying, although, you know, because the video will get taken down. So maybe it'll get put in the news tomorrow. Maybe it won't. I think if it doesn't get into the news, I think it's more terrifying than if it does. Because if it doesn't make the news, what that means is this sort of stuff, people just don't care about it anymore. Oh, yeah, it's another guy with one of those sharp pointed things outside of school. Yeah, it happens all the time. Nobody's bothered. We said, didn't we, guys? We said people would start targeting schools. Tony Baloney is saying, I think it's Zelensky, not Putin, that needs a slap. Tony Baloney, can you why would Zelensky need a slap, not Putin? Tony Baloney. If you Tony Baloney, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Why Zelensky needs a slap, not Putin? Right. Here's a good question. So Amanda Bullen is saying, sorry to ask, there's no need to be sorry. We struggle to get medication from abroad during the crazy time in 2020. Do they stockpile in the UK? I don't think they do, guys. And you know, when we used to talk about things to stockpile, depending how bad things get, I would speculate that any pharmacist would take things for themselves, any doctor would take things for themselves, anybody who works in that chemist would take things for themselves, you know, and then like the general population will be left with whatever's left. Now that's just me speculating, but you know, you've got to think like things like antibiotics. Like antibiotics are they're a miracle. You know, they are an absolute miracle. You know, and I would say that if there was a shortage of antibiotics and there was a case of strep going around like there was last year or the year before, I would say that people who work in the pharmacy would prioritize themselves and their own children. You know, and unfortunately, I don't think we do stockpile in the United Kingdom. I don't think we can stockpile, actually. Right, Tony Baloney, I'm still waiting for why you think right, Tony Baloney is saying because he's so corrupt. Okay, so look, okay, so I'm just going to give people a quick history lesson on why this conflict, how this conflict in Ukraine started. Now, we can go back to 1993, we can go back to 1991, we can go back literally hundreds of years. We're going to start this story in 2013. We're going to start this story in 2013. The Ukrainians had voted to have more economic ties with Europe. Now, they were looking at places like Czech Republic, who are a perfect example of how a post-Soviet state, a PSS, can do well when they move to capitalism. I mean, Czech Republic's beautiful, guys. So the Ukrainians wanted that. You know, they'd voted for it. It had been passed through parliament. And then at the last minute, the then president, Viktor Yanukovych, he said, yeah, actually, just as he was about to sign it, he said, yeah, actually, I'm not signing that document. I'm signing this document. And he signed another document that actually gave them closer ties to Russia. Now, that's what started what's known now as the Euromaidan protest. There were, you know, it was a revolution. It was huge. That, you know, it was the Maidan. Shortly after that, in 2014, the Russians annexed Crimea. They annexed parts of Donbass, huge parts. Initially, the Russians denied it. They said, no, we have no Russian troops in Crimea. You know, it was very, I was out there at this time, and it was very, I think it was my first real understanding of how social media, of the new dynamic of social media in these conflicts. When I was in the military, we didn't, like, social media wasn't really a thing as it is now. you know, so everything that was being reported was mainstream. So you know, for example, I would see tanks rolling over the Russian border, and I think, how can anyone say that those tanks are not Russian tanks? But still, in the media, social media, fake news, troll accounts, no, there are no Russian tanks. I'm thinking, it's fascinating. Anyway, so that's what happened 2013, 2014. That's the beginning. 2022, what was it? February 22nd, I think. Was it February 22nd, I think, or February 24th? I can't remember. 2022, that's when the big Russian invasion happened into Ukraine. There were tanks, there were drones, there were all types of atrocities happening. If you guys want to look at some of the things, Irpin, Bucha, and Borodyanka, you know, go and look at what happened in those places. Some absolutely horrific things, and I've seen a lot of that footage that's not been released to the. It's not been released to any media. So, you know, and then now, you know, and now we see people like wanting to negotiate and say, oh, but, you know, we should have a ceasefire. There isn't any way for a ceasefire, guys. There isn't. And you've got to ask yourselves, what would you do if you was if you was on that, in that country that had been occupied? Like, what would you do? Would you just say, oh, well, yeah, you can have it. We're good. We're good. Yeah, we're good. Like, there needs to be a ceasefire. People should stop. People should absolutely stop transcending each other into beams of light. It's ridiculous. But that's the reality of the situation. That's where we are. Right, people are talking about the 90s on the chat. Mr. Freeze is saying NATO encroaching past the agreed boundary line set in 2002 Minsk agreement. NATO has moved closer than it swore not to. Plus 50 bioweapon labs in Kiev alone. Okay, so first of all, Mr. Freeze, like I've never heard anything about a biolab in Ukraine, and I think I would have heard of it. So I think the biolab is fake news. I really do. I think the biolab is fake news. Anyway, but let me. So if anybody can present any evidence of that, I'll take that. When we talk about NATO encroachment, what happens is, Poland, for example, so before Poland went into NATO, I think that was 2002, actually. Yeah, I think it was. The Polish military ran with, you know, Soviet equipment, AK-47s, Dushikas, PKMs, Mi-17 helicopters, you know, T-784 tanks. You know, that's the kit and equipment they had as their military. Once they become part of NATO, they have to start spending on NATO armaments because they have to have that NATO interoperability. So they have to have a 5.56 rifle. They have to have, you know, NATO approved helicopters. Now, one of the main reasons for NATO expansion, it's got nothing to do with threatening borders. It's got everything to do with making money. Because once a country becomes part of NATO, that is big contracts for Lockheed, Raytheon, BAE Systems, Boeing, you know, really big contracts for those. So how the game works, and there's one in, I think he's a Labour MP. I think he's I don't know, whoever, I think he might be a Labour MP for Doncaster. I can't remember. I was speaking to him a while back and he's like, I'm like, yeah, you're on the take. I didn't. I didn't tell. He didn't know who I was. I was just nodding my head. And you find that, if you go and talk to people and you don't let them know you're a subject matter expert in something and just let them go, you will see how much bullshit they come out with, and then you can judge them. Then you can judge them accordingly. Anyway, I was talking, and I didn't let him know that I knew far more about the subject that he did. And he was saying, yeah, we're going to do this. Boeing are going to come to Doncaster and blah, blah, blah. And I was thinking, all right, he's probably on the take. So what I'm getting at here is these big prime defense contractors, they will move into a country and they will say to key politicians, if you push for this bill to become part of NATO, then you will get we'll give you a ton of money. They probably won't say it in those words. What they will say is, if you push for us to become for your country, if your country becomes part of NATO, I will give you a job when you're finished, and it will be 100 grand a year, and it will be 10 years, and you don't even have to come into work. And that's how they will do that. They will cook the books, make that happen, and then that's how NATO encroachment, NATO moves. And another thing I'll say about NATO encroachment is people volunteer to be part of NATO. Finland, for example, they volunteered to be part of NATO because of the threat of the Russians on their borders. Nobody forced Finland to become part of NATO. They volunteered and they asked to become part of NATO. That you have to go through a strict onboarding process. Like Ukraine, as the NATO right now, the rules to let people into NATO, you can't be in a war. So I don't know how Zelensky thinks he's going to get into NATO, but he does. Right, ladies and gentlemen, I've just looked at the time. Listen, guys, I am going to start to close this down in a minute. I will be jumping over to I'll be jumping over to YouTube in a minute. So Rose is saying, my daughter's partner is a nuclear engineer at BAE Systems. I worry about him. I'd worry about him as well. Nikki is saying, hi, Raven, the amount of money being sent to Ukraine, should it be more or less or none? I think this is a massive question. I think it needs to be. I think it needs to be spent better. I think a lot of that money is being misappropriated. I know a lot of that money is being misappropriated. I think that money needs to be spent a lot better rather than just throwing money at stuff and hoping it sorts itself out. I mean, you can do that at the beginning of a conflict. You have to do that at the beginning of a conflict. But once things calm down, you really need to think, right, okay, am I getting value for this product? Is that the best product? Can it be built cheaper anywhere else? What is the goal of sending money to Ukraine? Or do we want to finish the Russians off, or do we just want to support the Ukrainians? Because they're two very different things. Hang on. Somebody just put something capitals. Jody Lee has said, Trump, Ukraine can take back. No, not a chance. Yeah, so Jody Lee is saying, Donald Trump said Ukraine can take back all its land. Russia looks like a paper tiger. I often go against what the mainstream media are saying, and I would struggle to see how Ukraine can take back all their land by force without anyone else helping. If they could, they would have done it already. And the situation on the ground does not lie. The Russians are moving forwards every day, taking around 20 square kilometers every day. So although Donald Trump is Donald Trump, and I'm not saying anything negative about him, but he's wrong here. He was wrong about Ukraine before, and I was right, and I'm right here again. Right, ladies and gentlemen, listen, guys, the time has shot by today. I am going to jump over to YouTube for a little bit now. The crux of this video, guys, we kind of like sometimes we start on these videos and I have something we're going to talk about and we just go in an absolute different direction. So the crux of this video, guys, it was, I believe the United States takeover is coming. Everything I see now is more flowers sprouting out of the weeds, more of these little trees poking out through the weeds, and more of that sort of stuff is happening. I do have my blinkers on. I do think it's coming, guys. I don't think it's going to be by a violent means. It could be by a referendum. I mean, look, how far-fetched does this sound? If Nigel Farage floated in Parliament, our economy is broken, militarily we're broken, we don't have police on the streets, we can't look after ourselves, we can't do this, we can't do that, we can't do anything. Should we become part of the United States? These are all the benefits. How many people now would say yes or no? And then in a couple of years' time, when things are going to get worse, what would be that dynamic and what would be that change? Would more people say yes in the future? I think they would. And once you've opened that can, once you've opened that can of what's the word I'm looking for? Once you've opened that can of, I don't want to swear. Once you've opened that can of beans, you can't put them back in, because you know what, guys? Beans don't go back in that pot. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to jump over to YouTube now. If you're not going to jump over to YouTube, I will see you guys in the morning and just look at everything now. All these big American influencers, Elon Musk, Donald Trump, JD Vance, all these big Americanized institutions. Just think in the back of your mind, everything. If everything they're saying, do they think that they want to come over to the United Kingdom and take over? I think they do. I think it's going to happen. And you know what, guys? I'm actually saying I would actually welcome it. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going now. I'm going to be on YouTube. I'll be back on at 10 in the morning. And like and follow and all that stuff. And I think we're off. Right, we are off. No, we're not off. We're not off. We're off now. We're off now. Right. Hello, you guys. You fantastic lot. Right. Emma Green is saying, I would love to. Yeah, I'd like to be as well. Mr. Freeze is saying, ask America to let us be a temporary state while we fix everything, where we get to vote every 3 years. Why not? I don't think you can be. How would a temporary state work? Silly is saying, oh, she's talking to someone else. Mr. Freeze is saying, Sean's video earlier destroying that Bob villain dude. I haven't laughed like that in a while. It was an epic takedown. He's going to have to. He is going to have to reply at some point, guys. You know, he's. I'm not going to let this slip. I'm not going to let this slide. He's a nasty man. You know, he's a nasty man, this guy. You know, some of the things he's been saying, you know, like the only good pig, referring to police officers, is a dead pig. And like, I'm pro government, I'm pro police, I'm pro military, I'm pro rule of law. I think we should have a strong, robust, well enforced legal system. You know, I do. I think they're the things that I want. But you know, when I see people like this guy Bob Villan, and he would be the first person to go running to the police if somebody robbed his house or something. You know what, anyone would. But this is like, you know, and I get it. Let me caveat this. I totally get it. There's some very strange policing going on at the moment. There is some very strange two-tierisms I don't think that's the police's fault. And what I mean by that is I don't think it's those police officers at ground level. I think this is politicized policing. It's subverted policing. That's a better word for it. It's subverted policing. You know, I think those police officers are just like, do you think like when these police officers are looking, and they'll have all the statistics, the police officers, when they're looking at the crime statistics, do you think they're looking and thinking, right, John, we've got this estate over there. There's been a string of 6 burglaries this last 2 weeks, 4 car thefts and a house burnt down. Should we go and visit over there? Do you think they look and think, no? Raven said something here, or Raven didn't use his pronouns on a social media post. Let's go over there and get. I don't think they do. I really don't. I think what happens is Monday morning or whatever, when you turn up to your shift, I don't know how it works in the police force. When you turn up to be a police officer, you're on the job. You know, there'll be a briefing room every morning or whatever, start of every shift, and they'll say, right, guys, this happened today. I know this is bullshit, but we need to investigate seven social media crimes. This shift needs to investigate 7 social media crimes, and then you can go about your daily business or something like that. That's how I think it's being done behind the scenes. That's me speculating. I've got no inside information on this, guys. That's just me speculating on how it's done. And then those police officers are like, oh, God, right, let's just get it over and done with. Let's go out there, but you know, and deal with that. But coming back to this guy, Bob Villan, he's saying that the only good police officer is a dead police officer. I mean, like, you know, if I said that, and I never would, like, never, about anyone. I imagine me saying I'm not even going to say it now in jest because it's vile. But can you imagine if Tommy Robinson said that on stage? That would be him. That would be him. He'd be banged up. But Bob Villan, good old Bobby, gets to strut around with no shirt on and his little no cardio belly. Anyway, yeah, go check out my Bob Villan video if you've not done so far. Right, let me jump down. Templar Matt is saying, I'm watching Power Rangers, brushing up on my moves. I don't know what Mr. Freeze, your last comment, I don't know what that means. I'm not going to read it out. I don't know what that means. Lisa Jane is saying, I truly do not understand how the police are doing their jobs right now with the 2-tier policing. It must be so hard for them to go to work I agree, Lisa. You know, I think, and I look again, I know, well, I don't really know them, you know, I don't really know any police officers now, but I used to work and know pretty well a lot of police officers in the armed response units. And they were solid guys, you know, not as solid as the military guys, but they were still up there as solid guys. And, you know, they're good guys. They genuinely want to do good. They genuinely want to go after gangs. They want to go after gang members, and they want to take down these big kingpins who are, you know, who are ruining communities and, you know, and causing people to live in fear. They genuinely want to do that. Absolutely, 100%. You know, like we've just said, I think a lot of them, when they come into work on a Monday morning or whatever, they are being subverted into what they have to investigate and the types of arrests they have to make. Emma Green. So we spoke about this earlier. Trump's been saying that hang on. So Emma Green is saying, Trump says Kiev can fight and win all the Ukrainian lands back. They can't, guys. They can't. They really can't. They can't. That's just it. They can't. If you guys can remember when, in, what was it, last year, before Trump won the election, he was saying they were going to have a peace deal in Ukraine, and within 24, there wasn't. Look, I'm not saying anything negative about Trump. I think he's great. He's just wrong. He's wrong. I'm right. The Ukrainians don't have the capacity to push the Russians, but they don't have the manpower. They don't have the manpower. The Russians have the manpower. Somebody was on the chat earlier, and they were talking about how Ukrainian drones have destroyed the Red Army. They've not. They've slowed the Red Army down, yes, but the ground doesn't lie. Like when we talk about Ukraine and Russia, this war, literally the ground does not lie. Every day the Russians are taking more and more and more and more ground. Every day. Small gains, yes, but sustainable gains. What happened back in 2022, the Russians overextended themselves. They thought, erroneously, they thought that Ukraine was just going to fold. They didn't. They stood and they fought. And even if the Russians do manage to, even if the Ukrainians do manage to, by some miracle, push the Russians out, I mean, it's so absurd. They would deplete their forces so much, the Russians would just come straight back in anyway. It's a sheer numbers game, guys. Right now, it's a numbers game, and Russia has the numbers. Lisa Jane is saying, when do you think it will all be over? Well, it has to be over by, I would say it definitely has to be over by 2050. It has to be done and dusted by 2050, I think, or 2048 at least. And I think this all comes from the international trade restrictions that are on Antarctica. I think they want everything done and dusted, and then they want to move into Antarctica. Alex Corr is saying 1.5 million Russians transcended into a beam of light. Navy at the bottom of the Black Sea, all done with drones, though. I mean, Alex, that's like, with respect, Alex, that's just wrong. Like, that's absolutely wrong. Like, those numbers are wrong, all wrong. There's not 1.5 million Russians transcended into a beam of light. Highest estimates 350,000. Navy at the bottom of the Black Sea. I think 2 ships have been sank, yes, by drones. So I don't. Yeah, it's just wrong. But Potsinator is saying the only way Ukraine can win if with their land back is with NATO involvement. Yeah, even with NATO involvement, I'm not seeing it as a win, guys. I'm really not. There's so much more to this than numbers. There's so much more to this than manufacturing. There's so much more to this than weapon systems. There's so much more to this than culture. You've got to take all of this into consideration. And I just don't see that. I don't see that W for. I don't see that W for NATO minus the United States. Alex Corey is saying facts. Go watch Jake Bro. Who's Jake Bro? I don't need to watch Jake Bro. Tell Jake Bro to come and watch me. I don't need anyone. I don't need anyone to tell me what's happening in Ukraine. Trust me. I've got my own sources, thank you. Templamat is saying Putin will want it to end soon. He's only getting older. Again, you know, you've got to understand. That the world when Putin was growing up, the world when Putin was growing up was very different. Was very different to what it is now. You know, Putin grew up in that Soviet era, and he will remember the glory of the perceived glory of the Soviet Union. And we've got to be very careful about our children, what we teach our children, what we expose our children to. Oh, hang on. Right, let me get this up, guys, if this has just happened. Okay, 19 minutes ago from Reuters. Breaking news, everyone, guys. Okay, I'm reading this in real time. Get off. Norway police investigate explosion in central Oslo. September 23rd, Norwegian police said on Tuesday they were investigating a blast in central Oslo and warned people to stay away from the location as there were likely more explosives present. Wow. There were no reports of injuries at the site located in the immediate vicinity of the university campus and some 500 meters from the royal palace and the Israeli embassy. A rare step in authorities sent an emergency message to Oslo residents' mobile phones warning them about the blast. So look, guys, again, just real quick, if you're one of these people who's turned their emergency emergency beacon thing off their phone, why would you do that? Like, why would you turn it off your phone? I don't know why anyone would turn that off their phone. There's not really much more information out about this at the moment, guys. Like I said, this is literally in the last couple of minutes. So it does look like it's, that's all we know at the moment. Right, ladies and gentlemen, listen, guys, I am going to turn I don't know what it is. It could be a burst gas. Well, do you know what? I'll give you what they're saying again. The Norwegian police are saying that there are likely more explosives present. So that's all I know at this point, guys. I'm not going to speculate. My initial thoughts and reactions are the same as you guys, but, we'll have to see. Yesterday, there were drones seen over Norway. There are now, again, this could be a drone strike. Again, I said this is coming. I said we are going to get to a point where drone strikes, people learning how to build these quadcopters into little kabooms, and then that's going to happen. And this may be one of those incidents. I don't know if it is, guys. I've got to be clear. All we know from this point is that there's been a blast in central Oslo. People have been warned to stay away from the location as there are likely more explosives. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to close this down now. If you've not done so already, please hit those buttons. The buttons down below, the subscribe, the like, bell notification, all those buttons that down below if you're watching on YouTube. And if you're watching on X, then the buttons up there really helps me out each and every time you guys do that. And I get a little bit giddy every time you touch that button, ladies and gentlemen. And it's free. What else is free in today's world? Anyway, guys, thank you so much for hanging out with me tonight. I'll be back on tomorrow morning at 10.